Have you ever considered what it might be costing you to stay where you are? This week, I talked with Juliana Pereira, community builder and co author of Pivot Quest, about the uncertainty, self doubt, and possibility that come with career pivots. Drawing from her own 8 career pivots, Juliana shares what she's learned about becoming a beginner again and moving forward without having everything figured out. Here we talk about why career pivots can trigger imposter feelings, how curiosity can help quiet self doubt, and what your energy may be telling you about what to do next. Juliana also shares why it's so important to recognize the common threads across our experiences, to understand the value of our transferable skills, and to give ourselves permission to explore something new. We talk about taking small steps toward change and why the cost of staying where you are may be greater than we realize. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Juliana. I'm really excited for our conversation today, and I would love to kick us off by inviting you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you so much, Kim, for having me. I always say you need to know where you're from to know where you're going. And so I am a third culture kid. My mom is Colombian. My dad's Portuguese. They met in New York. And so I was born and raised in New York. And I studied in Boston. And then I headed over to New York to start sort of, what we do, right? Like the career ladder. And then after, I would say about almost 12 years in New York, I worked in advertising and PR. I definitely just got burnt out because I was flying with a creative team, it was much more economical flying, a team to Argentina for 2 days to be in a warehouse and shoot a commercial and come back, than actually shooting in New York City. And so at a very early age, at 26, I was just completely burnt out and said, okay, because of my background and because I knew of a different sort of lifestyle in Europe, I said, okay, well, why not move abroad? And so that's where sort of my career pivoting started and began. And I went from anywhere from fashion PR to then working in marketing to then being an entrepreneur, having my own company, selling it, exiting it, and then from there going into higher education, which I never thought I would do that, to create a campus life department for a business school and 10,000 students of over 160 nationalities. And then from there, global CMO of a tech consultancy, and to where I am today, which is I'm a community builder. I go into companies and I help companies B2B create spaces for thought leadership and better spaces to gather and be in community. And all of this brought me to co-author a book with my other co-author, which is Luis, which is called Pivot Quest, around career pivoting. And so that's kind of like I always say I'm like a cat with like 8 lives.
Well, my goodness, if anyone is authorized to write a book about pivoting, it certainly sounds like you. I mean, you've done a lot of pivoting, and I'd love to zoom in a little bit into how you were feeling during those pivots, because we know that times of change are often times of great anxiety and self-doubt, and a lot of breeding ground for imposter syndrome. How do you remember those times, and whether they were challenging for you? Did you struggle at all with making those shifts?
Yes, I definitely struggled. I think along the way, I thought to myself, like, someone's going to figure out that I don't know what I'm doing many times. And then I learned something, which is that everyone was kind of learning, and no one knew it 100%. And that even those people, because there's this false idea that successful people have it all figured out. And I think when you really surround yourself by people that you admire and that you find, that in your eyes are successful, everyone struggles. And not so many people are brave enough to say it, right? And not so many people actually, I've had really amazing bosses, and I've had other bosses that were not so amazing. But from the ones I definitely learned were the ones who were like, listen, guys, I don't know what I'm doing, but we're going to row and we're going to do this together and we're going to figure it out together. And so through all of these pivots, where what I think is that the imposter syndrome for me is sort of like the gap between what we've already earned, right? And what we're willing to believe, about ourselves.
Mm.
And I've been in that in between many, many times because, as you can imagine, with 8 career pivots, it forced me to become a beginner again and again and again. So,
Yeah, that's such a great way to describe it because there is a way in which I joke that managing imposter syndrome is about revealing the absurdity of our thinking and the expectations that we put on ourselves, right? And so when we're growing up and we're navigating our way through school and early career, there's a way in which we expect to learn. Like we don't go into fifth grade thinking I should already know everything that I'm about to learn, right?
yeah.
That's not the way that
Yeah.
we learn. But we reach a point in our careers where that changes, and all of a sudden it becomes an expectation of pre-mastery, or that, I'm going to
Yeah.
somehow be able to perfectly do whatever it
Yeah.
is that I'm about to do. And so we really owe it to ourselves to go back to those roots of learning and say, hey, you know what? Everything that I do well today was once new.
Yeah.
Everything that I do well was once, potentially scary and challenging, but I
Yep.
got here. And that should give us evidence that we're capable of doing that next time around.
Yeah, I think a part of it has to do with what type of personality you have, right? So, like, I'm very, I'm a perfectionist. I'm type A. So I think we suffer a lot more if you are that type of personality. And then there's another part, which is like it's drilled into you. And it's one of the best pieces of advice that I had very young with one of my bosses, but at the same time, it also, kind of like sets a framework and a mindset for you, which is that you have to demonstrate and show that you can already do the next level of your
Mhm.
job. So that's kind of where the expectations begin. And that's where we start, I think just forcing ourselves to not have that belief as a child, which is kind of like going at it with a curiosity, with a love of learning, with a smile on your face, and kind of going with the opposite of like this anxiousness and this tightness in your chest of, am I going to be able to do this? And do I know, maybe I know 70%, but I don't know all of it.
Mm.
Um, and I think that that's built around corporate, environment, and just, when you go and you have your annual reviews or what the expectations are placed there. So I definitely was not the ideal candidate for most of the jobs that I had. I remember my first job at BBDO, I worked on, it was Duracell and then Gillette Mach 3 razor, and it was very male dominated. And I remember coming out of college and being in a room and, being interviewed, like having, it was me and lots of other, guys in the room, and, me just thinking like, there's no way I'm going to get this job. And in the end, it was because, and then I step into a room, which was like another seven, men who were, interviewing me. And at the end, it was because I brought something different, right? That I ended up getting that job. And then that was, and I believe that early on in my career, I had these like aha moments of, I remember being in the middle of nowhere, like a little village in the US. I don't even know if it was like a little village in Oklahoma or something, and on a focus group for these batteries, and they were batteries for hearing aids. And I remember sitting there and seeing, right, these elderly people with the hearing aids and having all this difficulty like putting them in. And months later, when I'm sitting in a boardroom with all of these, men with senior positions, et cetera, and they're all talking about what is going to work and what's not going to work, none of them were like females sitting in that room in Oklahoma, listening to like these elderly people and seeing that most of them had hands that shook, that had that had bad eyesight, that had, and so like the little sticks that now, Duracell puts on the batteries comes from that. And that is, it could be male and female, and it could be because of the way that you approach, the world and life. So all of us bring something different and have different opportunities to sort of prove to ourselves that we're constantly learning, right? And that we have something to add.
I love that so much because I think it's our natural tendency. I've certainly done this, and I've seen this with a lot of other people that I've coached over the years, is we look around at our peer group, whatever that is, and we think, I need to be more like them. I don't have enough of what they have.
Hmm.
Instead of looking at what we uniquely do have to bring, as you're saying. And so the the perspective gets distorted because all of our attention goes to the gap
Of what?
between
Yeah.
us. Yeah, as opposed to what does this group need?
Yeah.
What
No,
what are they missing right now?
yeah. And that's also something that interviewing over 100 pivoters in 25 different countries and people from all over, and regardless of what culture, what age, everything, it's kind of like the way that you start looking at it. Like, curiosity, I always said, is the antidote to self-doubt.
Mhm.
Right. And so when you're coming at something and you're like asking yourself, okay, what can I learn from that? Versus, the not enough, right? Like, or what I'm missing. It's a much more like generous question, right? And and what I would say is that once you stop trying to prove to yourself, right, and to everyone around you, but you start trying to sort of focus like and have that shift beyond how am I being perceived versus how can I help? When you start thinking about how can I help, then that pressure sort of disappears. And that's what I've seen in lots of these career pivoters, is that nothing comes easy, and but it's a lot starts from you and from within. And a lot of times people think like, oh, I don't want this job, or because of AI, I just lost my job. I have a forced pivot, or or I see the tsunami coming. And so I want to get ahead of the curve. Whatever your situation is, the first thing that I've seen in over 100 of these people is the part of it's the self-discovery, right? It's the start with yourself, start with giving yourself permission, right? And so if you allow to take that label off of yourself and, dream bigger, think bigger, what things give you energy. That's another thing that we go so fast at a rhythm so fast, and a lots of us have lots of labels. We're not just an employee, or like or a president or an owner of a company. We're a mom, we're a dad, we're a daughter, we're a son, we're a, and there's a lot of pressure and a lot of noise. And so if we don't allow ourselves to stop and actually say, okay, how do I first give myself, grace and permission? Because I've heard from a lot of people, especially people who maybe they're the first generation to go to college, even or have that sort of education, of saying, my family doesn't understand me. Like my mother and my father think I should be grateful for what I have. But it's not that I'm not grateful, but I just feel like there's so much more I can add, in life or to something else. And so just having that awareness, right, is a moment that you stop and that you give yourself permission to and allow yourself to dream something else. But that imposter syndrome and that trying to analyze and trying to constantly, put, all these, it's like more questions, right? Like, and that we put on top of ourselves and doubts that we put on top of ourselves. And then, as you said, everyone who's around us and, what we're comparing ourselves to when we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to anyone because there's no one that is the same as we are.
Yes. Oh my gosh, there's so much gold in everything that you just said. And I want to go back to what you said earlier because this aligns so much with how I think about things too, is if we are asking ourselves the question, how do I prove that I belong in this room? We will never feel like we've measured up. But if we ask, how can I be of greatest service? How can I
Yep.
help? It orients our attention in a whole new direction because now it's externally focused on the people I'm trying to help, not my own inner critic. And I think there's a way in which it naturally draws us towards our strengths because then we become more creative, more, problem solving. There's this way in which we bring all of the strengths that we have to try to address the issue that we're trying to help with. And so it's a way I think of like almost like hacking your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. It
It,
is. It is. It is.
and so I think that's such a powerful way to think about it because then all of the unique strengths that we have kind of bubble up to the surface as we're thinking about how can I be of
Hmm.
service as opposed to how can I compare myself to this guy over here.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think I stopped trying to earn permission, from everyone else. And every meaningful pivot in my life began the moment I gave myself that first step of permission. And when you give yourself that permission, you are also giving yourself the grace and the understanding that I'm beginning again, right? This is like the first time you take a baby step, the first time you learn the ABCs, the first time like you're gonna walk into like middle school, the first time, and you go back and all of the and you're kind of like in the mind frame. What I've learned with every pivot is that I go back and I'm like, huh, if I did that, I can do this. And then the next, if I did that, I can do this.
Mm.
And that's why they say that falling forward is very important because it gives and why, especially for like children, right? Giving them moments where they can feel like that confidence is because they go back. We all go back and look at what did we, oh, when we had to first stand in front of the assembly and like, give a speech or whatever, or when we were in our first theater show, or when we were in all of those are these like little bricks that continue to build ourselves like as human beings, but you have to have those opportunities. And sometimes it was your parents who gave that to you, or your school, or your teacher. And as we get older, we somehow allowed, HR or our bosses or whatever we allowed that, when we gave that over to them. And I think more and more, and especially now with the future of work in the age of AI, what we're seeing is that no, you have to be accountable for yourself and for your career because it's not going to be a career anymore. It's going to be jobs, right? And then you're going to finish that job and you're going to go to the next one. And so hence you gained skill set and then you'll gain the next skill set, but you're going to be accountable to express, explain, pitch yourself to get your next job, right? Through being able to explain those transferable skills. And I've seen it time and time again where, for example, like one of the pivoters that was actually this person was in the Netherlands. He was, sort of like in the law sector many years, like 25 years. And he wanted to pivot, but he thought like, and he really liked coaching. He was thinking of doing something like as an executive coach. And he's like, but there's thousands of. So he like looked in the Netherlands, it was like 30,000 or whatever coaches. Out of those, he like narrowed it down to how many had like X certificates, and out of those, to try and see how he could make himself, unique within so many coaches. And what was funny was just like the last thing that I expected was that even me not like I'm coming at it as somebody new, a coach, but just from having my background in the legal sector, people trusted me, right? So it's
Mm.
just like I never thought that it would just be, like I didn't connect those two. So sometimes we have those skills or we have those, kind of like benefits that we don't even realize it.
Yeah.
And that's going to be very much the future. It's like not just getting, beyond ourselves and our limitations that we put, our limiting beliefs, but it's going to be really, really a better understanding. When people are afraid of I always say embrace it because it's going to make us be more human and be more in touch with ourselves. We've been so disconnected from ourselves that we've stepped away from what is uniquely what makes us human. And this is going to bring us closer to that.
I agree with you completely. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about what you were saying earlier around everybody's learning and nobody has it all figured out. And I think the rise of AI is really sort of shining a bright light on that because it's sort of an unprecedented or at least a transformational change to our world at this point in history. And so there are a lot of unanswered questions, and there will continue to be a lot of questions. And I think that one of the things that type A, perfectionists, high achievers, the people who are most prone to imposter syndrome tend to believe is that there's one right way to do things, and we need to figure out what that is.
Yeah.
And we are in a world where we could go in lots of different directions. And just with the example that you just gave of the guy who didn't realize that his background was going to be an advantage to him, it sounds like there was a way in which he was trying to figure out the formula or like the secret recipe for how to do this, as opposed to looking at what's my way of doing it.
Yeah.
And that could be just as valid, if not more, because of his unique background. And I think a lot about how can we get rid of that belief that I have to do it the right way
Yeah.
and really think about how we can do it our way.
Yeah. I think it starts like I think really it starts when we're young. And this goes back to I think education is changing, at least shifting a bit. My son is going to be 12, and what I really have seen from when I went to school and when he was going to school is, for example, I sat in one of his math classes one time and I was just like dumbfound because they give them the tools, but then they're like, okay, go figure it out. Like it's not like it wasn't how I had a teacher, a chalkboard, and it's like, this is the way you add this plus this, or you multiply in this way. It was kind of like they gave them jelly beans and they gave them marbles and they gave them, whatever. And they're like, go figure it out. And every kid came back with like maybe three different, four different ways. Obviously, there's one answer, but
Mhm.
there's different ways of getting to that answer. And I think that shift, or that learning starts, when you're young, because it's saying it's okay. Not everyone is going to figure it out the same way. And
Mm.
we were not taught that way. So now it's about, and again, like another person I interviewed, 82-year-old woman with 16 pivots, right? And she's still like pivoting, this incredible woman. And she said to me, my dad told me that if I learned how to type literally on a typewriter, I would always have a job. And she's just like, obviously, that's obsolete now. But really, what my dad was telling me and how I've taken it the rest of my life is if I learn, right, like that love of learning something, in that moment, it was the typewriter, right? Then I will always, be useful for other people and for myself. And this woman went from like a ranch cook to then having her own biological food store to teaching at Harvard to working in the Deloitte L&D department. Incredible story. And it all is because of her common thread that we always say there is a common thread. Even people who have had 16 different pivots, and me that I've had 8 different pivots, there's always a common thread. And that common thread, for her, it was learning. For me, it's always been like community, bridges, communication. So even if we've had radically, like, I mean, from tech consultancy to fashion, right? Like there's not, more radical difference than that. I clearly see what my threat is, but I believe that I believe a big part of it has to do with education and how we educate our children. And I'm happy to see that that's sort of shifting, and that there's not just the way of doing it and one way of doing it. And I think for older generations, we need to just, we need to be more accountable for ourselves and for what, the future of work means today for us.
Yeah, I love that. I have an 11-year-old as well, and I am
Mhm.
often blown away by the difference in how they learn. And I'm so grateful that that seems to be more flexible in terms of what they're being encouraged to do. And hopefully they will struggle less with some of the perfectionism that we do. I
Yeah.
want to ask you a question about the pivoting because I think that what you said about the common thread is really helpful on there's sort of a double-edged nature to either way that we talk about. If something is very linear and there's one right way to do it, in some sense it makes it easier because we can see the path, we can follow
Yep.
the directions, right? The alternative is obviously more flexible, more liberating, but I think it also creates overwhelm for people who are used to following a structure. Like academic structures are very predictable. Even though we can stress out in them, they're very comfortable because we kind of know what's expected of us. Can you talk a little bit about for people who are listening to this and they want to do some more self-discovery and think about their own common threads, are there certain initial steps you would encourage them to take?
Yeah, we actually with the book, we also have a downloadable like workbook that'll come with it. And that's a really like practical guide for people who want like small exercises. Like it could be a 3 minutes to like 10-minute exercise like daily. But I would say that a lot of people come to me and they say, everyone talks about like purpose and your passion and like these are such big words, right?
Mhm.
I always say focus on like your energy. What gives you energy? And I remember a few years back, I went to a career redesign coach because also like I have so many different pivots that at some point also get lost and you say, okay, well, yes, I know this is my common thread, but what's my next? Like I hear often like, okay, and so what do I do next?
Mhm.
Really, when somebody's saying, what do I do next? What they're really asking is, who am I now? Right. And everyone can, schools and whatnot prepare you for your first job, how to do that CV, how to do the interview. Yeah. They don't prepare you for your fourth pivot. And that's where things are shifting. And so, what I would say is that people who are struggling, I was struggling at one point, and I see it a lot when people are like, "Well, I don't know. I don't really know what to do next." Like it isn't obvious, right? Because, as you said, maybe there's worlds like academia, or maybe if you're in government, or maybe if you know that you know what your next step is. But life is proving to show that not necessarily, right? Because then something can happen and, funding gets cut or whatever, and then you have a whole different scenario. So I think the first thing is to be honest with yourself and to ask what things give you energy. And when I was asked that question, I, I, my type A personality, I was like, what do you mean, like dancing or listening to music? And my coach back then was just like, I don't know what gives Juliana, energy. And I just started crying because I really couldn't answer the simple question. And I found in that moment, this kind of like shining light, from outside of like, wow, I was really disconnected with myself and I was just kind of going with the flow. And when you go with the flow, sometimes that's great when opportunities come and you just keep going and you keep saying yes, because a lot of us tend to not say no to things. And so you just say yes. But that also comes with another, side of the coin, which is that you never stop to really ask yourself what, you want to do. And so when one of the exercises, which I did, and so I can testify that I think it really works, is that I took my notes app, right, like in my phone, or you can jot it down on a sheet of paper. And my coach made me track for 1 week things that give me energy. And so I remember saying to her, but I don't know what that means. And she's just like, your body will signal that you feel different, right? And I was like, okay, whatever, what does that mean? And I remember that I took the metro. I was like going to work, and I looked at the person next to me, and she had like these really cool like purple boot type thing. And I talked to everyone because I'm just extrovert. And I said, "Oh, I really like your boots," whatever. We ended up having another conversation, and then she told me about this cool new coffee spot, which was the stop I was getting off at, and whatever. Finished the conversation. And I got out of the metro and I was like, huh, okay, this made me feel good. Like, I don't know, it just made me feel good. So I jotted it down. And I kept doing that for 7 days. And by the seventh day, I could kind of track a pattern. And so I could track that for me, it was important to talk to strangers and people, right? For me, it was important, like the same place that I would pass by every day before getting to my house. It was like a little park and there were like benches and whatever. And I had never like stopped ever to sit on a bench, right? And so one day when I was passing through, like on the fifth day or something, I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to sit here for a second. And I sat and I like smelled these flowers, which in Spain, it's called asahar. It's like a certain flower that blooms at a certain moment. I had never smelled that flower in like years, like I'd been living, there. And so just these small doses that say you're alive, you're a human being, right? There's more things to work, but there are things that like nurture you, no? And that energy, and people are like, well, how does a flower or how does, and I was just like, well, talking to stranger, I'm a community builder, right? So like that is important to me. Spaces, a lot of people don't think about spaces. For me, having worked on a campus, right, of a university versus working on the 60th floor of a tower, versus working at my desk in my home, right? They're very different environments. And some of them can bring you more energy, some of them can bring you less, or maybe you're not even aware of it. So I think there is a part of this like energy sort of testing that could be useful for a lot of people. And then like throughout the book, we have a lot of different exercises like that just try and bring you closer to being able to define what your transferable skills are, because you can't just take your CV and be like, oh yeah, this is lots of people are like, oh, I'm a director of whatever, or I work in marketing, or I work in, but they can't translate that to I connect really well with people, like they say sales versus
Mhm.
like how they connect with people, how if they're a good team leader, if they have great communication skill, because they don't mind getting up and talking to whoever. So there's a lot of these transferable skills that also you can see sort of in what are the things that give you energy, because we don't think that way. We think about the hard stuff, like, but you don't think about what things are easy for you.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. And I also think about the the learning that comes with recognizing that maybe where you are today isn't bringing you the kind of energy that you want it to. Because I think that a lot of times we confuse self-doubt. Like maybe we're taking personal responsibility for how we feel instead of recognizing that it's a mismatch in the environment, right? And so if I'm not getting to use the skills that bring me energy, if I'm not getting to do the things that
Yeah.
make me feel like I'm at my best in this particular job, of course I'm going to doubt myself. Of course I'm not going to have positive feelings
Yeah.
about how and so really doing that work that you're describing is such a powerful way to get a baseline
Yeah.
of where you are
Because
today.
because a lot of times we always hear like, oh, work is important because we spend X number of hours there. I think work is one of the deepest expressions of being human, right?
Mhm.
Because it's work is where we contribute. If
Yeah.
you don't feel like you're contributing and you're serving, then the basic what humans need are, to give and to receive.
Yes,
So
right.
if you don't feel like that contribution is there, if you don't feel like you're being valued, if you don't feel that your values are aligned with where you are, if you don't feel that your energy is as at the highest it can be because of the environment you're in, then it may seem like something small, but it adds up.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And yeah, it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just means that there may be a better place for you
Like,
somewhere
e-
else.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, Juliana, this has been such a fantastic conversation, and I'm really excited for your book because I think that's going to just naturally extend the conversation that we're having here. For people who are listening and they want to learn more about you and find the book, where can they
Yep.
find you?
Perfect. Well, we have a website. So it's Pivot Quest is the name of the book. So pivot-quest.com. And then also you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Barnes and Nobles. It's coming out the 25th of August. So very excited because we're right at the countdown. And on Instagram at House of Pivots. So that's where, you can find all the information. And I love for people out of all the people I've interviewed, and even, I go to like small villages and, talk to people and that have completely changed their lives. Like just 2 weeks ago, I was in this small village in Portugal and I walked into the shop because my Instagram is House of Pivots and it was House of Vintage. And I walked in and it was this couple who had left Prague, their whole life. Like they had 3 kids. The oldest one was like already going to school. And and they were like, they worked at Netflix, like they had the corporate job and they just decided to like leave and start this vintage shop in another country in this like little town. And it was like such a courageous, move. But I said to them, I then like interviewed them and everything for the Instagram. It's on the Instagram account. But what I found really fascinating was that the woman, Teresa, she was like, if we keep putting our dreams on hold, how will we ever reach our dreams, right? And it's something so simple but so huge, right? And it's about taking that first step. So I hope that your listeners, take a first step if they are thinking about and feel this kind of like imposter syndrome. Like, I don't know if I can. I've been doing this for like, I've heard it so many times. I've invested so much. I have, and one of the people that I interviewed, I will never forget this line that he said to me. He's just like, people talk about like the cost of pivoting, right? Like the cost behind it. What about the cost of not
Mhm.
pivoting? What about all those new communities that you missed out on? What about all those skills, the new skills that you missed out on? What about, like another life that could have been out there for you? And so I think the book will be it's inspiring stories, like really, really inspiring stories from people all over the world. But it's also a practical guide to helping people make that first step towards, getting away from the imposter syndrome, discovering a bit more about themselves, and, taking that, which I always say, it's not a leap, right? These are tiny steps, and sometimes they're tiny experiments, but they will get you to where you want to go.
Ah, thank you so much, Juliana. It's so inspirational. I really appreciate your being here.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.